This is the story of a family that wanted to prove love could be shared, that a man could love multiple women equally, and that a community built outside the rules of society could survive. But behind the cameras, behind the smiles, and behind the carefully crafted introductions, there were cracks forming from the very beginning. Cracks that would one day shatter the entire Brown family. The story of Sister Wives begins long before the show ever aired. It begins with a belief system built on the idea that a man could take multiple wives in order to reach a higher spiritual calling. For decades, the Brown family lived quietly in Wyoming and Utah, away from the public eye, away from judgment, and away from mainstream society. They believed they were doing the right thing, living a life of faith, unity, sacrifice, and shared love. At least, that's what they told themselves, but every story has two versions. The one they wanted the world to see, and the one they tried desperately to hide, before the world knew their names. Before anyone had heard of Kody, Meri, Janelle, Christine, or Robin, they were just a family struggling to survive under the most complicated relationship structure anyone could imagine. A structure where love had to be divided, jealousy had to be swallowed, and emotions had to be controlled. In those early years, Kody Brown was a young, charismatic, energetic man. He believed he had a mission. He believed plural marriage was not just a lifestyle, it was a calling. And the women who married him believed the same. Or at least, they wanted to believe it. Meri was the first. She was young, deeply in love, and fiercely loyal. She imagined a life where her marriage would be stronger because of faith, not weaker because of sharing her husband with others. She believed that she and Kody were soulmates, that they would always be the foundation of the family. But the truth is, the moment Kody married his second wife, that foundation cracked. Janelle entered the family not out of romantic passion, but out of logic. She wanted stability, community, and a spiritual identity. She respected Kody, but she wasn't as emotional as Meri. She didn't crave the same kind of attention. And in Kody's mind, that made her the easier wife. But in a plural household, easier often turns into ignored. Quiet wives suffer silently, and Janelle was quiet for many, many years. Then came Christine. She was raised in polygamy, trained for it, prepared for it. She believed plural marriage was beautiful. She believed she was built for it. She wanted sisterhood, unity, and a big family. But when she became wife number 3, she began to understand something that would haunt her later. You can prepare for plural marriage in theory. You can never prepare for it emotionally. When the 3 wives lived under the same roof, their lives revolved around one man. But that man was stretched thin. One day he felt close to Meri. The next day he was connecting with Janelle. And the day after that, he was laughing and sharing long conversations with Christine. Every shift in Kody's attention created an earthquake in the emotional landscape of the home, and even back then, long before the cameras showed up, long before Kody met Robin, long before divorces and separations and national headlines, the wives were already hurting. They just didn't admit it, behind the closed doors of their early homes. The reality of plural marriage was far more complicated than the belief system that justified it. The jealousy was constant. The competition was endless. Every wife wanted to be the wife Kody loved the most, even though they all insisted they didn't care about favoritism. But favoritism existed. It always existed. The truth is, Kody was not equal with his wives, even in the beginning. He connected differently with each of them. He expected different things from each of them. And he gave different parts of himself depending on who he was with. The wives saw it. They felt it. But they didn't speak it, because speaking it meant breaking the illusion that plural marriage could be balanced and fair. And admitting the truth meant admitting failure. And none of them wanted to face that. Then came the moment that changed everything. The moment the Brown family decided to go public. It was a risk. A huge one. Polygamy was illegal in the United States. Families like theirs lived in fear of being arrested, fear of losing their children, fear of being separated by the court system. Coming out publicly meant exposing themselves to the world, to the government, and to every person who believed their lifestyle was wrong. So why did they do it? The wives say they wanted to educate society. Kody says he wanted to tell their story honestly. But the truth is simpler. They believed being on television would protect them. If millions of people saw their family as normal, kind, loving, and functional, then authorities would be less likely to break them apart. And so, in 2010, they signed the contract with TLC and opened their private world to the world's cameras. But the moment the cameras entered the home, something changed forever. Polygamy is difficult behind closed doors. It is impossible under a spotlight. Suddenly, everything was amplified, every insecurity, every jealousy, every argument. America watched as the wives forced smiles while their hearts were breaking. Viewers saw tension. The family didn't realize they were revealing. And the audience noticed something immediately. The family didn't function the way they claimed. Even in the earliest episodes, you can see it: small expressions, awkward glances, forced laughter. The wives didn't look like happy best friends. They looked like women trying to survive an emotional marathon. And for the first time, America saw Kody Brown not as a spiritual leader, but as a man, balancing too much for relationships. Dozens of children, financial chaos, emotional stress, and a growing desire for control. But the biggest earthquake was still to come. Because the moment Robyn entered the family, everything changed. Her presence would become the turning point. The rise of conflict, the rise of favoritism, the rise of emotional collapse. When the Brown family first introduced themselves to America, they presented a picture of unity, confidence, and harmony. They wanted viewers to believe that their plural marriage worked, that they had solved the emotional challenges most families never even face. But beneath that polished surface, something was already shifting. And that shift began the moment Kody Brown met a woman named Robyn. Kody was not looking for another wife. At least, that is what he told his family. They believed they were stable, with 3 wives, many children, and a functioning household. But when Kody saw Robyn, something changed inside him. She was different from his other wives in ways he couldn't hide. She was younger, soft-spoken, emotionally expressive. And she admired Kody with a kind of innocence he had not felt in years. Meri was the one who encouraged Kody to pursue Robyn. She believed another wife could strengthen their spiritual journey. She believed this was the right thing to do. But she could not predict what was coming. She could not imagine that she was opening a door that would eventually lead to her own emotional downfall. The wives noticed the change immediately. It was not in Kody's words but in his behavior. His eyes lit up when he talked about Robyn. His voice carried a nervous excitement when he called her. He paid more attention to his appearance before visiting her. He drove long distances just to spend time with her. Even though his other wives were overwhelmed at home, Robyn's arrival created an emotional earthquake. And each wife felt it in a different way. Meri, who once believed she held a special place in Kody's heart, began to feel replaced. She tried to be strong. She tried to act supportive. But the more she encouraged the relationship, the more she felt herself slipping into the background. She realized she had unintentionally handed Kody the freedom to emotionally move on from her. Janelle took it in a logical way, as she always had. She was not naturally jealous, but she noticed the imbalance. She saw how Kody became patient, gentle, and incredibly attentive with Robyn in ways he rarely was with her. Janelle had always been the independent one, the wife who didn't demand attention. But watching Robyn receive emotional care so easily made Janelle feel the inequality more sharply than ever. Christine, however, suffered the most. She had grown up in polygamy. She believed in the lifestyle deeply. She thought she was prepared for everything it came with. But nothing prepared her for the emotional impact of watching her husband fall in love again, this time with a different intensity. Christine saw something in Kody's relationship with Robyn that terrified her. She saw real, undeniable romantic chemistry. And that realization shook her to the core. For years, the family had lived with the illusion that plural marriage could be equal. Robyn's arrival destroyed that illusion. When Kody became engaged to Robyn, the family tried to appear supportive. They smiled for the cameras. They used the right words. But inside, they were breaking. The engagement showed something they could no longer pretend away. Kody was not adding a 4th wife. He was building a new emotional center around Robyn. During wedding preparations, this imbalance became impossible to ignore. Kody was not just excited, he was glowing. He was expressive, romantic, and openly affectionate. The other wives had never experienced that level of emotional attention from him. They watched as he gave Robyn the version of himself they had always wanted, but rarely received. The wedding did not bring the family closer. It marked the beginning of an emotional divide that would grow for years. Soon after the wedding, the family made a massive decision to flee Utah and move to Las Vegas because of legal pressure. They believed the move would unite them, but it did the opposite. Instead of living together under one roof, they moved into 4 separate houses. And those separate houses created 4 separate emotional realities. Kody divided his time between the homes, but his emotional presence was not evenly shared. Over time, it became clear that Robyn had become the emotional priority. She cried easily, expressed her needs openly, and Kody responded with tenderness and urgency. But when the other wives expressed emotions, Kody often became defensive, distant, or frustrated. This created a painful and obvious pattern. Robyn's feelings shaped Kody's decisions. The needs of the other wives were often treated as inconveniences. And slowly, the emotional structure of the Brown family began to collapse. By the time the family settled in Las Vegas, the divide was unmistakable. Meri felt replaced and isolated. Janelle felt distant and undervalued. Christine felt insecure and emotionally fragile. And Robyn, without trying to, became the center of Kody's world. Meanwhile, Kody was no longer trying to balance 4 marriages, he was choosing one emotionally. While merely maintaining the others, the Brown family continued to function for years after this, at least on the surface. They filmed episodes, showed family events, and tried to maintain unity. But behind every smile and every scene, the foundation was already cracking. What the world didn't know then was that this shift, the arrival of Robyn, was the beginning of a collapse so huge that it would eventually split the entire family apart, and the full unraveling of that collapse is the story of part 3. As the Brown family settled into their new homes in Las Vegas, something subtle but undeniable started happening inside their relationships. On the surface, everything looked organized. Each wife had her own house. Each household had structure. Kody moved from home to home, following a strict rotation. But emotionally, the family was no longer moving together. They were drifting, slowly, silently, and permanently. From the beginning, Las Vegas was supposed to be a fresh start. The family had escaped legal pressure in Utah. They were free from raids, from fear, from public judgment. But what they didn't realize was that the distance between their houses would create emotional distances that could never be undone. For the first time in their entire marriage, the wives were not forced to share the same walls. They were not forced to face each other's pain every day. They were not required to watch Kody walk into another wife's bedroom at night. In one way, it relieved pressure. In another way, it created something far worse: isolation. Isolation is the slow poison of plural marriage. Christine felt this first. She had always been the wife who tried to hold the family together. She was the one who organized the holidays, planned the meals, made sure the children felt united. But in Las Vegas, she struggled. She looked around her house and realized she was alone more often than she wanted to admit. Her children grew up. Her responsibilities changed. And the emotional attention she once hoped to get from Kody never came. Over time, Christine started expressing her frustrations. She talked openly about feeling insecure, feeling dismissed, feeling like she was no longer important. But Kody didn't receive this well. He became defensive. He interpreted her emotions as attacks. He often told her she was being dramatic, or that she was making things bigger than they were. And every time he responded that way, another piece of Christine's heart cracked. Meanwhile, Meri's emotional collapse continued quietly. Once upon a time, she was Kody's legal wife, his first love, his foundation. But after Robyn entered the picture, Meri's position changed forever. She tried to stay strong. She tried to act okay. But loneliness has a way of becoming visible even when you try to hide it. Meri spent more time alone than any other wife. Her only child, Mariah, eventually moved out. And when that happened, Meri became the only wife with an empty home. She struggled with her identity, her worth, and her place in the family. She looked at Kody and felt distance instead of partnership. Their conversations were short, their interactions were tense, and their emotional connection, once the strongest in the family, had become thin, fragile, and nearly invisible. Janelle handled everything with the same calmness she always had. She focused on her career, her children, and her personal goals. But even Janelle felt the shift in atmosphere. She noticed Kody's frustration rising. She noticed the wives growing tired. And she noticed that the teamwork they once had was slipping away. Janelle was the kind of wife who didn't need constant emotional reassurance. But even she felt the imbalance. Even she saw the favoritism she once tried to ignore. And then there was Robyn. In Las Vegas, Robyn's bond with Kody grew stronger than ever. She was emotionally open, expressive, vulnerable. And Kody was drawn to that intensity. He listened to her more closely. He supported her more fully. He was patient with her fears, her tears, her struggles. And slowly, the other wives began to feel what they had silently feared. Robin was becoming the emotional center of Kody's life. Kody didn't hide it. In fact, he often said Robin was the most loyal, the most understanding, and the most respectful wife. But every time he praised Robin publicly, he unknowingly created more division in the family. Because when a husband in a plural marriage shows visible favoritism, the entire structure collapses. The cracks deepened over the years. But the major fracture came during one of the most defining decisions in Brown family history, the legal divorce, when Kody told Meri that he needed to legally divorce her so he could marry Robin and adopt her children. Meri was devastated. She acted supportive. She said it was the right thing to do. But inside, she felt replaced emotionally, spiritually, and now legally. It was a moment that changed her relationship with Kody forever. And it confirmed something she had feared for a long time. She was no longer his partner. She was becoming an obligation. As Las Vegas years continued, each wife faced her own emotional journey. Christine tried to keep the peace, but grew more and more unhappy. Meri struggled with identity and eventually made a desperate emotional mistake online that shattered her trust with Kody permanently. Janelle focused on her independence, but quietly built emotional distance from Kody. And Robin settled comfortably into her role as the wife Kody trusted and relied on the most. Kody, meanwhile, became increasingly controlling. He wanted order. He wanted unity. He wanted all the wives to follow one vision, his. But the wives were no longer united. They were exhausted. They were hurt. They were trying to survive a lifestyle that demanded more emotional strength than anyone realized. The pandemic years later would expose these fractures publicly. But the collapse didn't begin in the pandemic. It began here, in Las Vegas, in the silent separation of homes, in the unspoken resentments, in the private tears, in the pain they tried to hide for the cameras. For years, the Brown family managed to hold themselves together. They filmed episodes, celebrated holidays, and pretended that plural marriage was still working. But deep down, each wife knew the truth none of them were ready to say out loud. Plural marriage was no longer sustainable. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not for the children, not for the wives, not even for Kody. The unraveling had already begun. All that remained was the final breaking point, and that breaking point is where the story continues in part 4. As the years passed in Las Vegas, the Brown family continued trying to hold onto an image of unity, but the truth behind closed doors was growing harder to hide. Every wife felt the emotional imbalance that had been forming since Robin joined the family. Every child sensed tension they couldn't fully understand. And Kody, who once believed he could manage 4 marriages with strength and fairness, began to feel his grip slipping. The Las Vegas period was supposed to be a new chapter, but instead, it became a slow unraveling. The wives were aging. Their children were growing up and forming opinions of their own. Their relationships with Kody were changing in ways none of them expected. And the emotional distance between the households was becoming permanent. One of the earliest signs of collapse came through the subtle, unspoken changes in Kody's behavior. He became more rigid, more defensive, and more obsessed with control. He demanded unity, but didn't offer the emotional presence needed to build it. He wanted loyalty, but struggled to show equal love. And the wives who had sacrificed so much for the plural lifestyle began questioning what they were receiving in return. Christine felt this shift most deeply. She had always been the peacemaker, the emotional center of the wives, the one who tried to make everything look normal, even when it wasn't. But with every passing year, the burden grew heavier. Her insecurities grew louder. Her disappointments became harder to hide. She watched Kody bond more deeply with Robin, while her own relationship with him felt increasingly hollow. She wanted affection. She wanted partnership. She wanted to be seen. But instead, she often felt dismissed, minimized, or blamed for feeling too much. At the same time, tension between Meri and Kody reached a breaking point. Their relationship had once been the strongest. They had shared years of memories, laughter, and partnership. But after the legal divorce and the emotional betrayal of the online relationship scandal, something inside Kody shut down permanently. He became cold toward Meri, distant, withdrawn, and uninterested in rebuilding what they once had. Meri tried to fix things. She tried therapy. She tried patience. She tried letting go of pride. But nothing worked. Kody treated her like a ghost, someone he acknowledged only when necessary, never with warmth. The most painful part for Meri wasn't the anger. It was the indifference. Anger means there is still a connection. Indifference means the connection is gone. Janelle watched all of this with a quiet sadness. She had always been independent, but she still hoped for a sense of partnership in her marriage. Over time, she noticed that Kody's expectations for her were growing more unrealistic. He wanted her loyalty, but didn't give her the emotional grounding a partner deserves. He expected her to follow his lead, but rarely listened to her perspective. Their communication weakened, their intimacy faded, and the emotional distance between them grew into something neither could ignore. Meanwhile, Robyn became the emotional safe zone of the family, at least for Kody. She cried openly. She expressed her fears. She leaned on him for support. And Kody, who wanted to feel needed and appreciated, gravitated toward her more intensely than ever. The favoritism became so obvious that even the children started noticing. They saw how differently their father treated Robyn compared to the other wives. They saw how he defended her, how he excused her, how he protected her emotions above everyone else's. This favoritism didn't just affect the wives, it affected the entire structure of the family. The children from other households began feeling ignored or unimportant. They struggled to connect with their father. Many of them later admitted they felt he cared more about Robyn's children than about them. And no matter how much Kody tried to deny it, the pattern was visible to everyone. Then came a moment that changed everything: the move to Flagstaff, Arizona. The decision to leave Las Vegas was meant to be a fresh start, but it quickly became one of the most stressful and painful chapters in their history. The move created financial chaos. The wives struggled to find stability. The children were uprooted once again. And the emotional fractures in the family deepened with every passing day. Christine hated the move almost immediately. She felt isolated. She felt unheard. She felt like Kody dismissed her feelings every time she expressed discomfort. She didn't feel supported as a partner. She didn't feel valued as a wife. And for the first time, she began to consider something she never imagined: leaving the family. At the same time, Meri became even more invisible. Her relationship with Kody was barely a relationship at all. They lived separate emotional lives. They barely talked. And when they did, their conversations were cold and distant. Meri wanted connection, but Kody had already ended the marriage emotionally. He just hadn't admitted it publicly. Janelle, meanwhile, was torn between her loyalty to the family and her growing desire for independence. She loved her children deeply and wanted what was best for them. But even she could feel the emotional weight of Kody's leadership, his increasing demands for loyalty, his frustration with dissent, his inability to recognize how his actions were affecting everyone. And then, just when the family thought they had adjusted to their new reality, something happened that would expose every hidden fracture, every buried insecurity, and every unspoken truth. The world shut down. The pandemic became a magnifying glass over every weakness in the Brown family. Every unresolved conflict became unavoidable. Every emotional wound grew deeper. Every strained relationship reached breaking point. Kody's rules, his control, his defensiveness, and his favoritism all escalated. The wives no longer saw him as a spiritual leader or a loving partner. They saw him as someone they could not reach emotionally, someone who seemed fully invested in only one household. For Christine, it was the final push. For Janelle, it was the beginning of her awakening. For Meri, it was confirmation that her marriage was over. And for Robyn, it was a moment that would change her relationship with the other wives forever. What happened next would transform the Brown family permanently. And the beginning of that transformation is the story of Part 5. When the pandemic struck, the Brown family entered a chapter that would expose every hidden truth they had spent years avoiding. What had once been private cracks within the marriages now became deep fractures that could no longer be ignored. And at the center of it all was a man trying desperately to enforce control over a family that was slipping away from him. For Kody, the pandemic was a test of loyalty. He created strict rules that were far more intense than what many families were following. He expected the wives and the children to obey those rules without question. He expected unity. He expected sacrifice. But what he didn't expect was resistance. Christine and Janelle were the first to push back. They believed the rules were unrealistic. They felt the guidelines were designed more around protecting Robin's household than protecting the entire family. They saw an imbalance in how Kody enforced them, and they felt he was trying to assert authority rather than provide leadership. Kody insisted he was simply being careful. But to the wives, his rules represented something deeper. They represented division. They represented favoritism. They represented a husband who seemed emotionally committed to only one household. Robin's. The pandemic forced everyone into their homes, and the homes were far apart. The distance between them became a metaphor for the emotional distance growing inside the family. The wives were no longer united under one roof, under one routine, under one vision. They lived separate lives, and Kody's presence or absence became more noticeable than ever. Christine felt the weight of this separation instantly. Her children grew more distant from Kody. Communication weakened. The already fragile relationship she had with him turned cold. She felt like a visitor in her own marriage, someone who existed outside of Kody's emotional world. She watched him invest time and energy into Robin's home while hers felt neglected, forgotten, and invisible. The few times Kody visited, their conversations were tense. Christine expressed her needs. Kody dismissed them. She wanted partnership. She received resistance. She wanted affection. She received criticism. Every interaction made her feel smaller, more unwanted, more disconnected. At the same time, Janelle struggled for balance. She tried to respect the rules. She tried to maintain peace. But she could not pretend she didn't see the patterns repeating themselves. Kody spent most of his time in one place, Robin's home. He justified it by saying Robin followed the rules. But Janelle felt the truth was much simpler. Kody preferred being there. The emotional comfort of that household was easier for him than the conflict in the others. The children across the families noticed this too. Many of them began expressing their frustration. Some said openly that they felt ignored by their father. Others admitted they rarely saw him. And a few refused to follow the strict rules, believing they were unfairly designed to favor only one part of the family. Through it all, Meri remained on the outskirts of everything. Her relationship with Kody had already deteriorated long before the pandemic, but now, it felt fully dead. She lived alone. She spent holidays alone. She barely saw her husband. And when she did, they had nothing left to talk about. Every attempt she made to reconnect was shut down. Every gesture went unnoticed. Meri realized she wasn't just in love, she was no longer even considered a partner. The pandemic didn't create these problems. It revealed them. For years, the wives had accepted emotional neglect. They had tolerated inequality. They had swallowed jealousy. They had sacrificed their needs for the sake of unity. But in isolation, their thoughts grew louder. Their pain became clearer. Their expectations shifted. And then came the moment that would change everything. The conversation that made Christine finally decide she had reached the end. It happened during a discussion about their teenage daughter, Isabel, who needed major surgery. Christine wanted Kody to be there. She needed support. Her daughter needed her father. But Kody refused. He said the travel was too dangerous during the pandemic. He said he couldn't risk being away from Robin's home. He said the rules made it impossible. For Christine, this was devastating. She realized in that moment that her children did not hold the same importance in their father's heart. She realized that her marriage had become a hollow structure, held up only by habit and history. And she realized that no matter how much she tried, Kody was never going to choose her or her children again. That realization changed everything. Christine stopped fighting for the marriage. She stopped waiting for affection. She stopped hoping for a moment of understanding. Instead, she began planning her future without Kody. Meanwhile, the tension between Janelle and Kody reached a new level. Their conversations became arguments. Their perspectives clashed. Janelle felt disrespected. Kody felt unsupported. Each fight pulled them further apart until the bond they once had became thin and fragile. At the same time, Meri's emotional isolation became permanent. Kody no longer pretended their relationship had a future. He said openly that he had no interest in intimacy. He saw no point in trying to fix the marriage. And Meri, after years of denial, finally accepted the truth. She was alone. The pandemic didn't just expose cracks in the Brown family, it created irreversible fractures. Christine was emotionally gone. Janelle was questioning everything. Meri was existing in the shadows, and Robin, though not at fault for everything, became the symbol of everything the other wives had lost. Kody believed the wives were turning against him. The wives believed he had already abandoned them, and the emotional collapse that had been building for decades was now accelerating toward a point of no return. The unraveling was no longer silent. It was visible, it was open, it was unstoppable, and the moment that would finally break Christine away from the family forever, the moment that would transform the entire future of the Brown family, was about to arrive. That turning point is the story of part 6.
Christine had spent years trying to make her marriage work. She had sacrificed her needs, buried her insecurities, and forced herself to accept a version of love that never fully included her. But after the surgery incident, something inside her changed forever. The moment Kody refused to be there for their daughter, she finally understood that she had been loving a man who no longer loved her back. For years, Christine held onto hope. She believed that if she tried hard enough, if she stayed patient enough, if she forgave enough, the relationship would heal. But the truth was always there. The affection she once had from Kody was gone. The connection was gone. The partnership was gone. And she could no longer ignore the reality that had been slowly unfolding inside her heart. She began pulling away quietly. Her smile faded, her energy drained, her hope dissolved. She stopped planning for a future with Kody. She stopped pretending, and for the first time in decades, she started thinking about what it would be like to build a life on her own without the chaos of plural marriage, without constant comparison, without emotional starvation. Kody, however, didn't seem to understand what was happening. To him, Christine's emotional withdrawal looked like rebellion. He accused her of not being loyal. He claimed she wasn't being supportive. He said she wasn't being a good sister wife. But what he never acknowledged was the truth. Christine had reached her breaking point because he had pushed her. Their conversations became confrontational. Christine wanted reassurance. She wanted emotional effort. She wanted honesty. But every time she tried to express her pain, Kody responded defensively. He blamed her insecurities. He accused her of sabotaging the family. He refused to recognize that his own choices had created the distance between them. The final fracture came during a moment Christine will never forget. She gathered the courage to ask Kody about the future of their marriage. She wanted to know if he still loved her. She wanted to know if he still saw a future with her. And in the most painful and pivotal moment of their relationship, he told her he was no longer interested in having an intimate marriage with her. His words shattered everything for Christine. Intimacy wasn't just physical, it was emotional. It was connection. It was partnership. And hearing that Kody no longer wanted that with her confirmed the truth she had been denying for years. She realized there was nothing left to fight for. Her marriage had already ended emotionally. She was just the last one to acknowledge it. After that moment, something inside Christine finally broke free. She began packing away her expectations. She stopped waiting for Kody to choose her. She stopped hoping for a future that would never come. And quietly, she started planning her escape. At the same time, tension between Janelle and Kody grew stronger than ever. Janelle was dealing with her own frustrations, financial struggles, emotional disconnect, and Kody's increasing demands for loyalty. He wanted her to prioritize him above everything else. But Janelle had always been independent. She had always made decisions for the good of her children. And she was growing tired of being blamed for problems she didn't create. Their disagreements became more frequent. Kody felt Janelle wasn't following his rules. Janelle felt Kody was ignoring reality. Their communication began breaking down. What was once a functional partnership slowly turned into two people living completely separate lives, connected only by obligation and history. Meanwhile, Meri was still living in emotional exile. Her relationship with Kody was beyond repair. They barely interacted. They barely spoke. Kody made it clear that he no longer considered their marriage romantic or fixable. And Meri, after years of denial, finally began accepting that she was nothing more than a symbolic wife kept in the family for appearances, not for love. Her loneliness deepened. Her isolation grew. She tried to find purpose through friends and business ventures. But inside, she was mourning a marriage that died long before the world knew it. Through all of this, Robyn watched the family fall apart with a mixture of sadness and confusion. She wanted unity. She wanted peace. She believed Kody was trying his best. But she couldn't ignore the reality that his emotional investment was primarily in her household. She saw the wives pulling away. She saw the resentment rising, and she struggled to understand how to fix something she didn't break, yet somehow became the center of. As Christine's emotional exit continued, the children began recognizing the truth too. Many of them felt distance from their father. They felt unheard. They felt unseen. Some openly questioned his priorities. Others quietly withdrew. The pandemic made everything visible, and the wounds between Kody and his older children became deeper than anyone expected. Christine's final breaking point came when she realized that her children deserved more than a fractured family. They deserved emotional safety. They deserved stability. They deserved a mother who wasn't constantly hurting. She understood that staying would mean teaching her children to accept neglect as normal. Leaving, on the other hand, meant giving them a chance at happiness. And so, she made her choice. She began packing up her household. She took down the family pictures. She folded away memories. She made arrangements. And slowly, she prepared to tell Kody that she was leaving the marriage for good. When the day came, the conversation was tense, heartbreaking, and inevitable. Christine told Kody she could no longer remain in a relationship that offered her nothing in return. She explained that she had been lonely for years. She said she needed emotional connection, respect, and partnership, things she no longer believed he could give her. And she told him she was leaving. Kody reacted with shock, anger, and disbelief. He accused her of betrayal. He said she was breaking apart the family. He said she had no right to leave. But Christine stood firm. She told him she had already been living without a husband for a long time. She said she was simply choosing to live without the pain as well. And with that decision, everything changed. Christine packed up her life and moved to Utah, leaving the plural marriage behind forever. It was the first major departure in the history of the Brown family, and her decision would set off a chain reaction that no one could stop. The family was now truly broken. Christine was free. Janelle was waking up. Meri was fading into the background. Kody was losing control. Robyn was watching everything collapse. And the aftermath of Christine's departure and the ripple effect it created would lead directly to the next stage of the Brown family's unraveling. That next stage is this story of part 7. When Christine left the family, it was more than a marriage ending. It was the collapse of the emotional structure that had held the Brown family together for decades. Her departure created a seismic shift inside the entire household. It forced everyone, Kody, the remaining wives, and even the children, to confront the truth they had been ignoring for years. Nothing was ever going to be the same again. Kody took Christine's decision as a personal attack. He didn't see it as a woman leaving an unhealthy relationship. He saw it as a betrayal of everything he believed in. He had built his identity around the idea that plural marriage could work. Christine leaving meant he had failed, and instead of reflecting on his role in that failure, he redirected his frustration toward the wives who remained. He became harsher, more defensive, more demanding, and more distant from anyone who questioned him. His behavior shifted drastically. He spoke of loyalty, but his actions pushed people away. He claimed unity was the priority, but he made it clear that only one household, Robyn's, had his full loyalty. He insisted that the wives were tearing the family apart, without acknowledging how his own choices had created the emotional divide. Christine's absence was felt everywhere. The laughter she brought, the warmth she carried, the way she softened the edges of conflict, those things were gone. What remained was tension, silence, and a sense of emotional emptiness that grew heavier with each passing day. For Janelle, Christine's departure was awakening. The two women had always been close. They supported each other, understood each other, and shared similar values. Without Christine, Janelle felt the isolation of plural marriage in a way she hadn't before. She began to see her own marriage with new clarity, the lack of emotional connection, the inconsistent support, the demands without reciprocity. Janelle realized she had been accepting crumbs for far too long. She had been functioning as a single mother. She had been building her own life because her husband wasn't present, and she started asking herself a question she had avoided for years. What am I getting from this marriage? As Janelle questioned her life, the tension with Kody escalated. Their conversations grew more confrontational. Kody accused her of not being loyal. He claimed she wasn't committed enough. He said she was choosing her children over him. But Janelle saw through the narrative. She recognized that what Kody called loyalty was really obedience, and she refused to sacrifice her children's well-being just to satisfy his ego. Their disagreements became explosive. Janelle, normally calm and rational, reached her breaking point. After years of being patient and quiet, she finally expressed the anger she had been holding inside. She confronted Kody about his behavior, his favoritism, and his complete lack of empathy toward her and her children. And for the first time, viewers saw Janelle speak with a level of clarity and strength that had been building for years. At the same time, Meri continued to fade emotionally. The more the family fell apart, the more irrelevant she felt. She tried to remain hopeful, but her marriage had long been dead. Kody made no effort to fix it. He said openly that he did not consider himself married to her. He stopped visiting her home. He stopped prioritizing her feelings. And Meri slowly realized she was waiting for a man who had already left her emotionally decades ago. Her loneliness became overwhelming. She watched the other wives struggle with Kody in ways she recognized from her own past. She saw the patterns repeating. She saw the favoritism growing stronger, and she finally understood that staying in a loveless marriage would not fix anything. It would only prolong her pain. Meanwhile, Robyn found herself in a difficult position. She said she wanted peace and unity, but she was also the center of the imbalance. She cried over the family falling apart. She said she didn't want to be the only wife left, but despite her tears, the other wives couldn't ignore the obvious. She was the one receiving the time, the effort, the affection, the emotional support. She was getting everything they had once hoped for, but no longer received. And then there was the issue of the children. As the wives struggled, the older Brown children began speaking out publicly. They expressed their frustration with Kody. They talked about the absence they felt growing up. They talked about the lack of support during the pandemic. Many of them openly said they did not feel like a priority in their father's life. These words hurt Kody deeply, but instead of reflecting, he blamed the wives. He said they turned the children against him. He refused to acknowledge the distance he had created on his own. The pressure inside the family became unbearable. Arguments became frequent. Trust evaporated. Respect diminished, and unity became impossible. The final blow came during a heated confrontation between Janelle and Kody. Years of resentment poured out. Janelle made it clear that she could not continue living under conditions that felt emotionally abusive. She said she was done being blamed for problems she didn't create. She said she deserved a partner who cared about her needs, not just her compliance. Kody, stunned and angry, accused her of betrayal just as he had accused Christine. But Janelle didn't back down. She walked away from the argument with a level of freedom she hadn't felt in years. That moment marked the beginning of the end of their marriage. Janelle began distancing herself. She sought her own space, her own peace, her own future. And although she didn't make an official announcement at first, the emotional separation was clear to everyone. Now, two marriages were crumbling. Christine was gone. Janelle was halfway out the door. Meri was living in emotional exile. And Kody was left clinging to the idea that Robyn was the only loyal wife he had. The Brown family, once a symbol of unity, was fractured beyond repair. But the story wasn't over yet. There was still one more unraveling to come. One final collapse. One final breaking point that would redefine the future of the entire family. And that part of the story is what continues in part 8. After Christine left and Janelle emotionally separated herself, the Brown family entered its final stage of unraveling. What remained was only the illusion of a plural marriage, thin, fragile, and held together by a man who still believed the wives owed him loyalty he no longer offered in return. The emotional collapse was already complete. What was left now was the acknowledgement of that collapse. For years, Meri had lingered in a limbo between hope and denial. She had believed that her marriage could be revived, that her history with Kody meant something, that all the years of sacrifice counted for something. But after watching Christine walk away with strength and after seeing Janelle finally refuse to be diminished, Meri began facing a truth she had avoided for too long. She had been alone long before anyone said the words out loud. Kody barely visited her home. He barely called. He barely made eye contact during family gatherings. Their conversations, when they happened, were awkward and cold. He talked to her like a business associate, not a partner. He said repeatedly that he didn't see a future with her, that he didn't feel anything romantic, that the relationship no longer made sense. Meri kept trying to hold on because she didn't want to be the first wife to leave. She didn't want to be the one who failed. She didn't want to break the structure she had given her life to. But when she finally looked at the empty spaces inside her home, inside her marriage, and inside her heart, she saw the truth reflected back at her clearly. The marriage had died long before she was ready to bury it. Over time, she stopped chasing after Kody. She stopped trying to be noticed. She stopped attempting to fix something that was beyond repair. Slowly, she accepted the emotional death of the marriage. And with that acceptance came freedom, a quiet, heavy freedom that marked the end of the last piece of the original foundation. Meanwhile, Robyn watched the family crumble in front of her. She cried often. She expressed her confusion, her fear, and her sadness. She said she never wanted to be the only wife left. But the other wives saw something she didn't acknowledge. She was the only wife whose relationship with Kody ever truly worked. She received his time, his affection, his emotional support, his loyalty, and while she claimed she wanted unity, the structure of the family had shifted so completely toward her household that rebuilding was impossible. Kody leaned on Robyn for emotional validation. He saw her as the one who never questioned him, the one who always aligned with him, the one who reflected back the image of the man he wanted to believe he was. But even Robyn began realizing a painful truth. Being the last remaining wife did not give her a full family. It gave her a lonely version of the dream she once imagined, one built on the ruins of relationships that used to matter. The children, now older, began speaking more openly about their experiences. Many expressed hurt over their father's absence. Many talked about fractured bonds that had never healed. Some refused to accept him back into their lives. Others tried to rebuild, but with caution. The emotional damage was deep, spanning years of imbalance and missed moments. The pandemic years had changed everything permanently, and even after the world returned to normal, the Brown family never did. When Janelle eventually confirmed that she and Kody had separated, it wasn't a surprise. It was the natural outcome of everything that had been building for years. She walked away with dignity and clarity, knowing she had done everything she could. She didn't hate Kody. She didn't blame him for everything. But she also knew she deserved more than a marriage held together by duty and disappointment. Christine, now living in Utah, rebuilt her life with joy. She smiled more. She laughed more. She created a home filled with warmth, support, and emotional safety. She reconnected with her children. She rediscovered herself. She found love again, a kind of love she had never experienced in her plural marriage. She became living proof that life after heartbreak could be brighter than anything that came before it. Emmy or I eventually walked away as well. Not with anger, not with drama, just with acceptance. She knew the marriage had been over for a long time, and by letting go, She finally gave herself permission to grow beyond the story she had once believed was her destiny. And then there was Kody left with only one wife, and even that relationship strained by the weight of everything that had happened. He spoke often about betrayal, about disloyalty, about the wives abandoning him. But beneath that frustration was a man grappling with the truth that the family he tried to lead had fallen apart because he never understood what leadership really meant. Plural marriage could survive financial hardship. It could survive jealousy. It could survive long distances and legal threats. But it could not survive emotional inequality. The downfall of the Brown family was not a sudden explosion. It was a slow erosion year after year, moment after moment, until nothing was left to hold the pieces together. Christine left for love and freedom. Janelle left for self-respect and clarity. Meri left because there was nothing left to stay for. And Kody stayed with the only relationship that still reflected the version of himself he wanted to believe in. The story of sister wives became more than a reality show. It became a lesson in human connection, a lesson in emotional honesty, a lesson in what happens when people ignore their needs, their pain, and their worth for too long. In the end, the Brown family didn't fail because plural marriage is impossible. They failed because the emotional investment that held them together was never equal, and the truth of that inequality eventually surfaced for all to see. What remains now is not a plural family, but individual lives moving forward, each shaped by years of sacrifice, heartbreak, and, ultimately, courage. Christine found a new beginning. Janelle found her independence. Meri found closure. Robin found herself in a reality she never expected. And Kody, for the first time in decades, found himself standing in a family structure he never imagined, one where loyalty could no longer be demanded and love could no longer be shared by force. This is the end of the Brown family as the world once knew them. But for the wives, it is the beginning of the lives they always deserved. As the emotional atmosphere continued to shift inside the Brown family, the reality of their situation became impossible to ignore. Each wife's path was now separating from the others, and the fragile structure they once called a family continued to weaken. The aftermath of Christine's departure had shaken everyone, but now a deeper truth was unfolding, one that would change the family forever. Janelle found herself at a crossroads. She had always been the calm, rational voice within the chaos. She didn't seek conflict. She didn't demand constant affection. She managed her own household with strength and resilience. But as she watched Kody's growing anger, his shifting priorities, and his increasingly harsh accusations, she realized something that had been quietly building inside her for years. She was done sacrificing her peace for a marriage that no longer fed her soul. The more Kody pushed for obedience, the more Janelle pushed back with reason. She tried explaining her perspective. She tried showing him the imbalance he refused to see. She tried highlighting the needs of their children. But Kody didn't want a conversation, he wanted control. And Janelle had never been the kind of woman who thrived under control. As their arguments grew more frequent, Janelle began feeling a kind of emotional exhaustion she had never known before. She had raised children largely on her own. She had worked tirelessly for stability. And now, after all these years, she felt more alone than ever. She realized that her marriage had become a partnership in name only. The emotional foundation was gone, the connection was fading, and the future she once imagined was no longer possible. One evening, after yet another heated conversation with Kody, Janelle sat alone in her home and felt a strange peace settle over her. It wasn't a happy feeling. It wasn't relief. But it was clarity, the kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop fighting for something that no longer exists. She wasn't leaving to make a statement. She wasn't leaving to rebel. She was leaving because the marriage no longer gave her life. Meanwhile, Meri continued drifting further into emotional isolation. Her marriage with Kody was practically non-existent. They had no intimacy, no friendship, no connection. The conversations they had were formal, distant, and filled with tension. And the more Meri watched Kody pour energy into Robin's home, the more she understood that she was not part of his future. She struggled with this truth. She held onto memories from the early days, memories of laughter, road trips, late-night talks, and the closeness they once shared. She revisited old family photos, trying to make sense of how everything had fallen apart so dramatically. But every time she tried to repair the relationship, she felt like she was reaching out to someone who wasn't reaching back. Kody made it clear, in words and actions, that he shared no romantic connection with her anymore. He didn't believe in rebuilding what had been lost. He didn't want to revisit the past. He wanted to move forward, but forward only meant moving deeper into the life he shared with Robyn. The emotional abandonment became heavier with each passing week. And although Meri didn't say anything publicly at first, she realized the marriage was over. She had been holding on to the idea of loyalty, of faith, of commitment. But loyalty without love is prison, and Meri had been living in that prison long enough. Robyn, meanwhile, was living in a reality she never wanted. She didn't want to be the last wife standing. She didn't want the other wives to leave. She didn't want to be surrounded by the weight of blame. She cried often. She expressed her fear that her dream of a united plural family was ending. She begged for communication. She asked for patience. But the more she tried to hold the family together, the more obvious it became that the fractures were beyond repair. The children, observing all of this, felt torn. They cared about each other, but the tensions between the adults created emotional distance between the siblings. Conversations became awkward, holidays became divided, and the once chaotic but united energy of the Brown household was replaced with silence, confusion, and pain. Kody didn't take responsibility for the collapse. He blamed the wives. He blamed their lack of loyalty. He blamed their independence. He blamed their decisions. In his mind, the family was falling apart because they didn't follow his vision. But the wives saw the truth more clearly than ever. The family was falling apart because Kody was only willing to give emotionally to one relationship. The final breaking point between Kody and Janelle arrived during an explosive argument that left both of them shaken. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was the culmination of years of unspoken resentment. Janelle confronted him with everything she had held inside. She told him she felt unsupported. She told him she didn't feel valued. She told him she was tired of being blamed for problems he refused to acknowledge. Kody responded with anger, frustration, and disbelief. He accused her of being disrespectful. He accused her of being disloyal. He said she was betraying the family. But Janelle didn't back down. For the first time in their marriage, she put her own emotional well-being above Kody's expectations. When she walked away from that argument, she knew something profound had changed inside her. She no longer felt the fear, confusion, or guilt that once held her back. She felt clarity, steady, calm, unshakable clarity. And with that clarity came a decision. She was ready to separate. As Janelle quietly stepped out of the marriage, Meri's emotional departure began as well. And suddenly, Kody was faced with a reality he never expected. The family he spent decades building was unraveling so quickly that he could no longer pretend it could be saved. 3 wives were emotionally gone. 2 had already walked away. 1 was barely holding on, and only 1 marriage remained intact. But even that marriage, the one with Robyn, was not as strong as Kody believed, because it was built not on unity, but on the ruins of all the relationships that came before it. The final truth, the one that would define the future of the entire family, would soon come crashing down. And that moment of truth continues in part 11. After Janelle emotionally separated from Kody, the Brown family shifted into a new phase, one filled with silence, unresolved tension, and the undeniable sense that the family structure they once fought to protect was now beyond repair. What had begun as a spiritual mission, a dream of living a life centered around unity and shared love, had devolved into a fractured reality where each person walked their own emotional path. Kody struggled to process what was happening around him. He saw himself as the victim of betrayal, the center of a family that no longer appreciated his sacrifices. In his mind, the wives had abandoned him, turned their children against him, and refused to follow his leadership. But he couldn't see his role in the collapse. He couldn't see the years of emotional neglect. He couldn't see the imbalance he had created. And he couldn't see how his choices had pushed the wives toward independence instead of unity. When Janelle stepped away, Kody tried to rationalize her decision by telling himself she had always been too independent. But what he didn't understand was that her independence had kept the family stable for decades. Her ability to function without constant support was the very reason the plural marriage survived as long as it did. She wasn't rebelling, she was simply choosing peace. Meri, meanwhile, reached a point where the weight of her loneliness became undeniable. She began reflecting on her entire adult life. She remembered the early days when she and Kody were deeply connected. She remembered the dreams they once shared. She remembered believing that they were building something meaningful together. But that dream had died long ago, slowly, painfully, and without closure. For years, she kept hoping Kody would return to her emotionally. She hoped he would reflect on their history. She hoped he would find a way to forgive the mistakes of the past. But instead, he distanced himself further. He stopped trying. He stopped listening. He stopped caring. And Meri finally understood staying would only continue the cycle of emotional absence she had endured for too long. During a rare and uncomfortable conversation, Kody finally admitted openly that he no longer saw himself as married to Meri. He didn't see a romantic future. He didn't want to rebuild what was lost. And for Meri, hearing those words spoken so casually was a moment of brutal clarity. It wasn't anger she felt. It wasn't heartbreak. It was acceptance. She knew the marriage was over. She knew the bond was gone. She knew she had to leave. She didn't walk away with bitterness. She walked away with quiet strength, the kind that comes from surviving years of emotional abandonment and finally choosing herself. With Christine gone, Janelle separated, and Meri emotionally exiting, the Brown family was now reduced to a single functional marriage, Kody and Robyn. But even this marriage was under a kind of pressure neither of them expected. For the first time in their lives, Kody and Robyn were not part of a large, interconnected family. They weren't sharing responsibilities with 3 other women. They weren't navigating multiple households. They weren't functioning within a community. They were alone emotionally, spiritually, and practically died, and the loneliness surprised them. Robyn had always dreamed of a big, united plural family. She imagined sister wives raising children together, holidays filled with chaos and joy, a home overflowing with love and connection. But now, she felt the emptiness of a reality she never wanted. There were fewer voices in the home, fewer footsteps, fewer dinners shared, fewer reasons to smile. She looked around and saw the consequences of the imbalance. She had become the face of even if she didn't cause all of it. The wives didn't resent her because she existed. They resented the emotional weight Kody placed on her alone. She had become the gravitational center without ever asking for it. And now she was left holding a dream that didn't exist anymore. Kody, too, felt the isolation. He no longer had multiple households to visit. He no longer felt needed in the same way. The idea of plural marriage had given him identity, purpose, and a sense of leadership. But without the family unit, he felt stripped of something he never expected to lose. He missed the noise. He missed the chaos. He missed the sense of being at the center of something larger than himself. But he also struggled with accepting responsibility. Instead of reflecting on his mistakes, he blamed the wives. He blamed their independence. He blamed the pandemic. He blamed everything except his own choices. When the children confronted him again, expressing their hurt and distance, he didn't realize that their pain was rooted not in disloyalty, but in long-standing neglect. He didn't see how many milestones he had missed. He didn't see how much resentment had built up over the years. And he didn't see how his absence had shaped their view of him. The family gatherings that remained were tense. Conversations felt forced. Smiles seemed rehearsed. The connection that once defined the Brown family was gone. But the biggest emotional shift came when the wives, each on their own path, finally began to rebuild their lives without the weight of plural marriage holding them down. Christine flourished in Utah. She embraced her independence. She built a home filled with laughter, love, and hope. She grew closer to her children. She rediscovered her confidence. And for the first time in years, she felt genuinely happy. Janelle created her own future with determination and courage. She focused on her health, her work, and her personal growth. She built a life rooted in self-respect. She recognized her worth, and she moved forward without regret. Meri reinvented herself with a quiet strength. She traveled. She worked on her own projects. She nurtured friendships, and she learned that her life had value outside of her marriage. She found peace not in a relationship, but in herself. And through all of this, the world watched the once unbreakable Brown family transform into something entirely different. Individual lives moving in separate directions, each shaped by years of sacrifice, heartbreak, and finally, courage. What remained was one final chapter, one more stage of truth, reflection, and closure. And that final chapter unfolds in part 12. In the end, the Brown family stood in the aftermath of a journey that had spanned decades, one built on faith, sacrifice, hope, and heartbreak. They had entered plural marriage believing it would make them stronger. They believed love could be multiplied, shared, and balanced. They believed unity would overpower jealousy, insecurity, and emotional needs. But as time revealed, no belief system could protect a family from the truth that was always waiting. Love cannot be forced, loyalty cannot be demanded, and emotional inequality will always rise to the surface. When the dust settled, each person stood alone, facing a new chapter without the structure that once defined their lives. For Kody, the final realization was the most painful. He had always seen himself as the leader, the protector, the center of the family. But now, as he looked at everything that had fallen apart, he was forced to confront the truth he had avoided for years. He didn't lose his family because they betrayed him. He lost his family because he didn't nurture the emotional connections that held them together. He replayed the moments when Christine cried for help and he dismissed her. He remembered the times Janelle asked for partnership and he ignored her. He thought about the years Meri spent begging for attention while he pulled further away. He saw the children who felt invisible, unheard, and unimportant. He saw the imbalance he had created, the favoritism he refused to acknowledge, and the emotional divide he unintentionally built. And for the first time, Kody felt the loneliness his wives had lived with for so long. Robin, standing beside him, felt the weight of the broken family just as deeply. She never wanted to be the last wife, the only partner left. Her dream was a home filled with sisterhood, women working together, children growing together, holidays filled with noise and love. But instead, she found herself living in a quiet house, surrounded by the echoes of what could have been. She felt responsible, even though the truth was complicated. She wondered if she could have done more to build bridges. She wondered if her presence unintentionally widened the cracks. She wondered why the love she shared with Kody became the symbol of everything the other wives lost. She didn't want to be the last one standing. She wanted to be one of many. But dreams rarely unfold the way we imagined. Christine, living far from the emotional storm she had escaped, blossomed into a version of herself she had never known. She found joy in simple moments. She found strength in freedom. She found love again, not the conditional, fragile love she had once depended on, but a love that lifted her and weighing her down. Her children saw her transformation and felt inspired. They watched their mother reclaim her happiness, her confidence, and her identity, and they realized that leaving wasn't an act of breaking the family, it was an act of saving herself. Janelle built a life centered around peace and stability. Free from the emotional tug-of-war, she focused on her health, her goals, and her children. She realized that strength wasn't staying in a marriage that drained her. Strength was recognizing she deserved better. She found a version of herself she had forgotten existed, a woman capable of standing on her own without apology. Meri, after years of isolation, finally stepped out of the shadow of a marriage that had ended long before she admitted it. She discovered that her value was not tied to being a wife. She found purpose in her independence, comfort in her friendships, and courage in starting again. She realized her story didn't end with leaving Kody, it began their dot as their lives diverged. Something remarkable happened. The wives grew closer to one another than they had been in years. Not through plural marriage, not through shared obligation, but through shared survival. They understood each other's pain. They respected each other's choices. They supported each other's healing. And they built a new kind of sisterhood, one that did not require a shared husband, only shared strength. Meanwhile, the children continued forging their own paths. Many maintained close bonds with their mothers, siblings, and extended family. Some worked to repair their relationships with their father. Others chose distance. But all of them carried the lessons of their upbringing into their own future's lessons about love, commitment, boundaries, and self-worth. The world looked at the Brown family and saw a story of collapse, but the truth was far more human. It wasn't collapse, it was transformation. It wasn't failure, it was evolution. It wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something healthier, something truer, something real. Plural marriage didn't break the family. Ignoring emotional needs broke it. Favoritism broke it. Silence broke it. Fear broke it. And love misplaced, imbalanced, and uneven broke it the most. But healing came when each person chose honesty over denial, peace over chaos, and self-respect over tradition. In the final chapter of their story as a plural family, they stood not as wives and husband, but as individuals who learned one of life's hardest lessons. Sometimes you must let go of the life you built to find the life you deserve. Christine found hers. Janelle found hers. Meri found hers. Even Kody, in the silence of a world he no longer controlled, began searching for his. And Robin, with her dream forever changed, faced a future that was no longer shared, but still full of possibility. This is how the Brown family truly ended. Not in anger, not in destruction, but in truth, growth, and the quiet courage of walking separate roads toward better futures.